Hi, welcome to Tinfoil Handkerchief Alignment, and today I'm going to talk about the third astrological sign in the zodiac, Gemini. Gemini is an air sign and rules from May 21st until June 20th. It's symbolized by the twins, primarily representing duality and communication. And duality is literally one of my favorite topics of conversation because there's literally a dual aspect to everything, which largely corresponds with energetic alignment and balancing aspects within self. Gemini is at home in the third astrological house, which represents communication, learning, siblings, and local travel, as well as peers, which could mean friends, colleagues, and even competitors or opposition. Gemini and the third astrological house are ruled by the planet of Mercury. Mercury also represents correlations and connections between our analytical and rational mind and our objectivity in how we view and deal with situations, as well as perception, curiosity, and the fluidity of life, which also correlates to the duality of Gemini and the balancing of opposite aspects. Because Gemini is representative of communication, it also makes sense that this sign corresponds to the throat chakra, which, in addition to how we communicate, also oversees articulation and how we express our thoughts, feelings, and ideas to others. It also impacts personal truth and honesty, as well as how we express our creativity, which is cool because that also connects to the sacral chakra, but sacral chakra, the way I interpret it, is more where we generate the creativity rather than express it. Expression is the physical articulation of things that are not physical, bringing our non-tangible thoughts into a 3D reality. The throat chakra is represented by the color blue. However, Gemini itself corresponds to the color yellow, which is the color of the solar plexus that oversees our authenticity and personal power. The color yellow is optimistic, energetic, and associated with positivity. It also represents sociability, wisdom, intelligence, and curiosity. Gemini in the concept of duality can also represent light and dark aspects of self. More attuned to the light, they're personable, versatile, charming, and great problem solvers with a sharp wit. While being more attuned to the darker aspects, they can be unreliable, superficial, manipulative, or two-faced. Though often very extroverted, Geminis can also be prone to getting stuck in their feelings or in their heads. That can look like inconsistency, overthinking, being scattered, and indecisiveness if unbalanced. Even extroversion, though generally a positive thing, can become more negatively attuned if the need to be around others means they struggle to be alone with themselves. To be clear, sometimes being a little more introverted and having healthy boundaries is a form of self-care, especially when you're feeling a bit energetically drained and need to recharge. As always, it's all about finding balance within that. Geminis are often really great conversationalists who can get along with diverse groups of people, likely because they're always looking for new adventures, experiences, or things to learn and people to meet. Getting along with a lot of people isn't a bad trait. It's how they fit into those groups that could become a negative trait. Because they can blend in with so many different groups, they may only present the traits of themselves that relate to whichever group they're with at whatever time. So it can be less authentic and more superficial when it comes to connections or conversation. I think of it more in the concept of being who they think people want them to be in that moment rather than just being themselves. There is a difference between only showing certain aspects of yourself to be liked by certain people and sharing commonalities within a certain group. And I think that's where a lot of people, not just Geminis, get stuck in more negative aspects of being superficial. There is a difference in enjoying diverse perspectives or hobbies as an individual and acting otherwise with different people in an effort to be liked. Gossip can be a byproduct of this, but I would say it relates more to superficiality or being competitive than it does being two-faced, though that can be true as well. Again, I'm just saying this in terms of when these aspects are negatively attuned and it's not specific to Geminis. A lot of people gossip, and honestly, I blame cancel culture for the increase in people who play both sides, because I think many people do it to avoid being canceled. So in that case, it becomes more of a plausible deniability kind of thing, and that's where I think the two-facedness comes into play. It really should be more of a don't say it about someone if you wouldn't say it to their face, or you aren't willing to explain yourself or have a direct conversation if you're being challenged on it. From my perspective, it just seems to encourage the two-facedness, unnecessary competition, and makes people more afraid to be themselves and takes away from any incentive for people to change. Because it's hard to feel like anything is worth changing when you're canceled and you feel like you'll always be labeled that way. And I say that as someone who's been falsely labeled. The more ridiculous thing about doing it to avoid cancel culture too is that what's acceptable these days can change so quickly. There are a lot of things that were totally acceptable 5, 10, or 20 years ago. And I just think we should keep more of an open mind about that. Though I used to be more negatively attuned because I did used to enjoy participating in gossip, which now I have no interest. And I was also a different version of myself depending on who I was with, which in my case was always just me trying to be liked. And I honestly didn't even realize how misguided I was in that kind of thinking. When I had healed significantly within myself, old perceptions of me by others were still there. I've said before that it's not as hard to change or be a better person as it is to convince other people that you've changed. But that is a matter of consistency. If you remain consistent and true to the changes within yourself, then people will eventually see you have changed for the better. The difference for me was understanding that the changes I made to me were for me and not others. So it didn't matter as much if people didn't believe that I could positively attune traits of my own that had, for most of my life, been negatively attuned. When I attuned to the positive, I felt more healed in aspects where I used to have more anxiety or insecurities, which is where a lot of those negatively attuned aspects were presenting themselves. For my own healing, I remained consistent in my progress, despite the constant accusations and old labels. It's the consistency that will eventually show which labels are still accurate and which weren't or were kind of unfounded to begin with. Though there will always be people that try to pull you back into old negative behaviors, but by remaining consistent in your healing, you'll eventually prove them wrong. I'm not gonna lie though, sometimes it can be really hard to remain consistent when people from your past are constantly trying to remind you of who you used to be when you were a less healed or more negatively attuned version of yourself. When there are a lot of people who are stuck in certain perceptions of you, it's really their own commitment to misunderstanding you or their own unhealed spaces within self. If it wasn't, they wouldn't be constantly trying to lower your vibration as you heal, because at that point they're trying to keep you at a more comparable vibration to them. And if they're stuck in a lower vibration, they're going to want you to stay stuck in a lower vibration. And a lot of it too, I think, comes from others being insecure in their belief that they can change. But that doesn't mean that you can't. So it's important to remember that you don't have to stay negatively attuned to anything. And understanding this doesn't make you two-faced, inauthentic, or not truthful, because it's just personal growth. When you're trying to do better and you're trying to make positive changes within self, that's the only way to truly personally grow. I've also found that there's truth to the sentiment that those who take issue with your boundaries or healing aspects within self are those who benefited from you not having boundaries or staying unhealed, which in turn shows that they're more negatively attuned, insecure, or unhealed. In which case, why does their opinion of your healing matter if they themselves can't demonstrate the same level of consistency or growth in their own healing? Because Geminis are predisposed to being really social and enjoy being around other people, they do have tendencies towards wanting to fit in with whoever they're around and can struggle with inconsistency. So they may also struggle to maintain change and positive growth if they feel like there is a certain perception about them from other people. And it's important to use your discernment, because not everything is going to be positive and not everything is going to be negative. It really just depends. Ultimately, I think it comes back to self-worth, authenticity, and personal truth, all aspects within the middle chakras of the throat, heart, and solar plexus. I say that because a sign like Gemini might put more emphasis on seeking validation from others rather than within self, which would impact overall flow within multiple chakras that touch on the overlapping aspects predisposed to be more negatively attuned within Geminis. Duality, which is pretty much embodied by the sign of Gemini, is one of the most interesting and, in my opinion, most misinterpreted concepts. There's always a cause and effect, and I know sometimes it can sound like I'm a little harsh on toxic positives, but it's because I feel like they only look at the positives and ignore the negative aspects, which in itself is indicative of an overall imbalance within someone when they can only focus on the positive without acknowledging that there is a negative that exists. To me, it's equivalent of running away from your problems rather than acknowledging that they're there. In order to truly heal aspects within self, you have to work through your more negatively attuned traits. It's more about acknowledging that those negative aspects within self are there and why they're there or how they developed. The problem I find with toxic positives, again, this is just my opinion, is that they seem to refuse to acknowledge that there are negative aspects. What I've seen that develop into, especially in the digital age, is that even a raised voice in frustration or a sad friend is seen as being negative, but things like that aren't negative on their own. Like, for example, a debate isn't a fight. In my opinion, if you feel like a debate is a fight or bringing up something negative is a personal attack, then chances are there is an imbalance or you don't truly believe in the strength of your viewpoint, which would be a more negative aspect within self, and that it's not necessarily a negative trait within the other person. But again, there are a lot of nuances to every situation. But if someone else is willing to debate their viewpoint and you're not, then that would be indicative of a negatively attuned trait within yourself and not the other person. To be fair, there aren't a lot of people who are confident debaters these days, but I also think that has to do with a lot of people who are more attuned to toxic positivity and who rely on talking points and validation from others, which I think largely stems from fear. Life experiences can help shape who we are, both positive and negative. Like I've said before, in my life, the negative experiences have helped me grow. That's not to say I don't enjoy positive experiences, because I do. Reviewing the negative aspects within myself and healing my inner wounds is what helped me attune more to positivity. Whereas anybody who knew me prior to me healing would have said that I was a pretty negative person. But I'm also a firm believer in people can change, and I try to be a living example of that. And because I've gone through all of those experiences, I appreciate the good things that much more, even just little glimmers, because I've had so many negative experiences. And when I didn't have the same level of appreciation for the little things, I was an overall more negative person. But I also wouldn't have had the same appreciation for the little things if I hadn't had so many negative experiences, to the point where sometimes the little glimmers were the only bright spots on really dark days for me. And trust me, I'm not saying I want negative things to happen, because that is definitely not true. I'm just saying that in order to survive the negativity in my life, I had to focus on the good things, no matter how small they were. No one wants bad things to happen, at least you shouldn't, and if you do, that's a whole other issue of being negatively attuned. But ultimately, everyone wants to be happy, healthy, and have good experiences, and enjoy healthy relationships and be in good situations. But no one can have that all the time. It's really just not attainable. It truly is a matter of taking the good with the bad, because it is all about balance. And I think a lot of it has to do with appreciating what you have. You can still aspire to wanting more, but your level of validation doesn't have to rely on how much you have. Running from your problems doesn't mean you'll never have them. It means when you inevitably do have a problem that you can't run from, it'll feel more intense, and more unhealed aspects or negatively attuned traits within self will become more apparent at the same time. Whereas if you work to heal or rebalance those aspects within self, you can handle things in a more positive way, and it will attract more positivity to you. You're able to come to a more balanced and peaceful resolution with a more calm demeanor more often. Again, it's all about balance, and running from the negative, while it may feel helpful in the moment, further throws off that balance. I don't believe that you can be truly happy if you're just pretending to be, which to me is what toxic positives do, and And that's why I've talked about this as much as I have. The way to be happy is through healing, or there's still a level of imbalance within self that will cause you discomfort. I'll go back to the concept of debating. When I think of why people seem so unwilling to have a real debate rather than a finger-pointing screaming match over talking points, is because they're worried it will change their perspective. Which isn't a bad thing because it's more symbolic of growth and doing better when you know better. In my opinion, it doesn't mean you have to change your perspective, but there may be things that you haven't considered or things that you learn through that debate that helps you grow, even if it's just a matter of perspective. Where I think all of that gets complicated goes back to cancel culture. I think there are a lot of people who don't want their perspectives challenged because they're worried about cancellation. So they stick to the talking points that feel safe, but are often unable to explain why they feel the way they do about it or how they came to feel so strongly about that perspective on that particular topic, which again would be more indicative of imbalances or negatively attuned traits within self, particularly as they relate to fear, lack of confidence, or low self-worth. When it comes to self-worth and confidence, I think that also pertains a lot to authenticity. Or in the case of Geminis, I think a lot of that is impacted by how much validation they seek from other people. But again, not specific to Geminis, I'm just talking about traits and aspects. I also think that goes back to what I was saying in the heart chakra episode about how I don't think a lot of us love ourselves unconditionally enough to be able to truly love or trust others or believe that they could love us as our authentic selves, even if our opinions or perspectives change, but applies to a lot of other things and situations and relationships as well. When you're not being authentic to you, it's because you're more reliant on the opinions and validations of others, and others who don't have to live your life. So how can you be truly happy like that if you're living for the opinions of other people? Because what I've learned about other people is you're not going to make other people happy, but if you focus on being your authentic self, you're more likely to find people who love you for you. So they're truer connections on a stronger foundation to begin with. Where I also think a lot of people get this a little misinterpreted is ignoring or running from your problems doesn't mean you're happy and doesn't mean those problems don't exist. Even if you get validation for how presentably happy you are, it will feel hollow. And there will still be an internal disruption within your own energy and chakra system because deep down you know that it's not authentic positivity. Just because you can look happy doesn't mean you are happy. In a world that focuses on aesthetic things, we tend to forget that. Being strong and pretending to be happy aren't the same thing either. And I think that's a distinction that people struggle to make as well, but I think it's an important one to make. There is also a difference between just trying to get through the day when you feel like you're falling apart and overtly pretending to be happy and putting on an aesthetic show of, I feel great all the time kind of thing. Sometimes when you're just trying to hold it together, letting other people in on what's bothering you feels more like adding unnecessary pressure. It's a matter of how you deal with it within self that makes the difference. Whether or not you're actually trying to sort through and heal those hard feelings within self, or if you just keep pushing them down by putting on a happy front every day. The facade is more energetically draining than coming to terms with how you feel and why. Even if it doesn't feel like that immediately, but as far as long-term growth goes, healing those aspects within self will eventually lead to something closer to the feelings of true happiness and contentment. And I can't stress enough that that doesn't mean that you'll never have bad days or face challenging situations. Like I've said previously, they'll just feel less energetically intense and you'll be able to remain more grounded, calm, and feeling peaceful in how you handle the different situations, even if they're negative, which can also help diffuse more volatile situations. You don't have to face challenges or unfair situations with anger. Looking at them as an opportunity for growth or character building, even if hard in the moment, can transmute those negative feelings into something more positive, authentically positive, which is how to be an actual positive rather than a toxic one. And my interpretation of it is that they're called toxic positives because it gives a false perception of what positivity and happiness really is or what it looks like. It confuses the definitions of positivity and happiness and sets an unhealthy and not reasonably attainable standard of what happiness and healing actually is or what it looks like. because when it's more negatively attuned like that, it can make yourself and others feel more devalued and can actually hurt relationships or situations more than actually help them. It's the same concept I was talking about in the Taurus episode about holding on to feelings without addressing them. They still build up, and that's where things like resentment come into play, which can in turn impact other areas within your chakra system. In the example of relationships of any kind, the more resentment that builds up, the more volatile those relationships can become, and the quicker they can deteriorate. So it's often worth having a rational debate over a smaller issue before it becomes a larger issue that leaves both people within that connection feeling unheard or undervalued, which in my opinion is indicative of either being fearful or wanting to gain control in some capacity, neither of which are indicators of a healthy relationship. So although it may be uncomfortable to have the conversation in the moment, doing so actually helps maintain the balance. It will also likely improve the situation and allow for a stronger connection to develop if there is consistent commitment to growth within that particular relationship. And that can be a relationship of any kind. Again, I don't think all toxic positives are bad people. Mostly I think they're hurt and misguided. But I also do think that there are some that do it to play the victim, to try to justify what they do to others, which is more of a control thing. Either way, all of it is an indication of imbalances within themselves. And also, none of that is specific to Geminis. Just because someone else is willing to work through their own issues, even if it's uncomfortable, and even if they're not the most happy through it, they shouldn't be judged for wanting to heal and wanting to grow. Especially if they're trying to go about it in a healthy, positive way. Sometimes when people are going through tough times, what they don't need is people bailing on them because things get hard. It just makes things harder. True friendships and good relationships help bring others back to a place of balance, even if it's not the most fun in the moment. But if you truly care about someone, you should want them happy. But that also doesn't pertain to people who say that they're trying to help when really they're just trying to make things worse for personal gain. Because there are a lot of people that do that too. So when I'm talking about toxic positives who play the victim, that's kind of more what I'm referring to in that aspect. Now, I will say, as I've said before, that people also have to be willing to help themselves. There has to be a level of self-accountability and healing within self, because you can't always rely on other people to be able to help you heal in those aspects. Sometimes that's really hard on your own, and it does help to have a support system. There is a difference between sharing an emotional load to help someone get back on their feet and someone taking advantage of the help of others. However, not all hardships and challenges are self-made, and I think that's important to remember too. Some circumstances are just unfair or are just extremely hard. Or in some cases, they're just extenuating circumstances. That's why discernment is so important, but you'll never reach a place of being able to discern if you refuse to see both the good and the bad. As far as crystals go, emerald can help with internal harmony and balance. Pearls are also great for assisting with finding your authentic self and personal purpose. Alexandrite is a representation of personal transformation, just as how healing unbalanced aspects within self can lead to personal growth and a personal transformation. Since I see Gemini as a representation of all aspects within self and the positive, negative sides to it, there are a lot of other stones that I think would be great. It just depends on which traits are out of balance and what you're trying to work on. I think master healing or cleansing stones could be of great benefit to balancing some of those aspects to start, like a selenite or different types of quartz. Clear is good for cleansing out negative energy, or a golden healer, or in my opinion, though others may debate it, amethyst. I say amethyst because it's like a spiritual healing stone. It helps to better discern between how you feel and what is a projection from others. So I hope you've enjoyed this overview of how those can be better balanced out by healing aspects within self and improving overall balance, which in turn helps with expression and personal truth, which corresponds to the Gemini connected throat chakra. If you're interested in booking any energy healing services or card readings, check out my Etsy shop or check out my other YouTube channel, Tinfoil Handkerchief Tarot, for general collective readings. Until next time, keep the peace.